Before I share this clip of Dr. Mohammad Marandis, who's from the University of Tehran, and he talks about how basically the Iranian government and Iranians cannot do, no matter what they do, they can't seem to do the right thing as far as the US and the Western media go. And he talks about, what the US is doing and basically pointing at Iran, and yet they're actually doing all the things that they're accusing Iran of doing. It's actually an interesting clip, and he's a very eloquent speaker, and I think it's something that it's very rare to actually hear anything about Iran. Iran is constantly vilified by the Western media, intentionally so, and when you do hear something about it, or when you see something about it, you've got people shaking their fists or shouting death to America, which actually doesn't mean death to Americans. It means death to basically US empire, which is something we should all want, since the US empire is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. That's what they mean, but of course the US and its ally apartheid Israel like to present Iran as this crazed, violent, sort of Islamic extremist, fundamentalist kind of crazy people. And so they'll show this death to America thing, which they chant, which, as I said, it doesn't mean what it sounds like it means. And also you'll just see snippets of violent imagery, which is what we are brought up with, with countries that don't submit to US empire. Over the decades, you will see images that keep them in this little box, like a monolith of, sort of either violent savages and that kind of, language sort of thing. So that one day when the US wants to invade for resources like they did in Iraq and, for hegemony in the region, then all they have to do is, sort of amp up the vilification of that country a little bit. But all the work has been done by the corporate media over the decades to keep that narrative kind of bubbling along. So that's what's happened with Iran. There's that continual that they're sort of some kind of evil nation that just wants to destroy everything. That's the narrative, and that's the presentation of the corporate media and of many Western politicians. And in fact, people who go to Iran actually find it to be, the Iranian people to be incredibly friendly, and Iranian people don't hold Americans in the same, so they don't hold Americans responsible necessarily for what their government is doing. Of course, there's some responsibility there if we're not being anti-imperialist and anti-war, but the Iranians on the whole do not blame the American people for what the psychopaths in their government are doing. So anyway, I'm going to show you that clip from Dr. Mohammad Marandis from the Grey Zone with Max Blumenthal and Anya Parenpil and Gareth Porter. They're all in that particular discussion, and you should watch the whole discussion. I'll leave a link to that. Getting back to the good news that happened about 24 hours ago almost now, where Julian Assange, absolutely shockingly and surprisingly to me, they refused to extradite him to the US. Now that is, they say it's because of his mental state, because it's most likely that he would kill himself if he was extradited to the Special Administrative Measures in the United States, which is extreme torture, and basically he would hardly ever see a human being. He's not even able to communicate with other prisoners. And I'm going to slot in, if I can find it, something that Kevin Gostola posted this morning in his live stream, Kevin Gostola from Shadowproof, about what Special Administrative Measures is about. And I've actually done one video, I think, on Special Administrative Measures about a year or so ago, when they were talking about it with Julian Assange. And it's terrible, and it just is an indictment of the American prison system, that the UK didn't want to send Julian Assange there because they knew, the judge knew, that her career would be tainted if he had been sent there and killed himself. It wasn't about Assange and his mental health or his physical safety or anything. It was really about her career. As you know, the UK had a kangaroo court. It was incredibly biased. And Jennifer Robinson talks about that to Democracy Now!, which maybe I'll show you on another clip, of how difficult it was trying to put his case together. They did everything they could in the UK to make sure that Julian Assange couldn't get his case together against, and he shouldn't have even been in Belmarsh prison, which is like an extreme prison for, for murderers. I hate to call people murderers. People who have murdered, terrorists. I don't know what that means to the UK, prison system, but that's what they call it, terrorists and murderers. So he was put in that prison, and really his only crime, in quotes, was journalism. But anyway, it was really good news, and I have to say I could hardly believe when I saw Kevin Gostola tweet that she'd actually said that she didn't think that it was appropriate, or that he was basically going to kill himself due to his Asperger's. He would kill himself. He single-pointedly he would aim for that if he was extradited to the US. And I think he would have actually possibly even considered killing himself in the UK rather than go to the US. But apparently in the US, even in these maximum security prisons where it's just so horrific, apparently there's somebody kills themselves every day. So it's quite possible you can do that. I would have thought they would have made it difficult for people to do that, but no. So apparently there's suicides all the time, and of course COVID is ripping through different prisons, which means that Julian Assange would possibly die of COVID even before that happened. So basically it would have been a death sentence either way. And I think this Judge Baretsta, I think her name was, she did not want to be the one to be doing that. So they used his mental health and as a way to wriggle out of following through with this US extradition. But really it had nothing to do with Assange, and I think they just kind of wanted to wriggle out of it, and they used his mental health. Sadly, and very frightening, that Judge Baretsta actually held up all the US security state talking points. She held them all up, vilifying, the whole, just like you would expect, vilifying press, the idea of press freedom. And so, it actually it continues to set up a dangerous precedent for any future journalists, whistleblowers, publishers, that if they expose war crimes, that they can expect the kind of treatment, the torturous treatment that Julian Assange has endured over the last 10 years. So that's something that's very frightening about, even though the extradition request by the US was blocked for Julian Assange. All those awful things that they were vilifying Assange over, basically endangering press freedom of Assange and the rest of the, what's left of the Fourth Estate, the ones that are actually exposing crimes. It's endangering all of that through these precedents that Judge Baretsta has set up in her ruling, in her verdict. The only thing that was any good was the blocking of the extradition. So that's still very, very problematic. And also Julian Assange, I don't know where he's staying today. I don't know if they sent him back to Belmarsh prison. I hope not. It's riddled with COVID, and he deserves to be, well, really, he should go straight to some kind of hospital for treatment, because he's really in not good shape physically, and mentally, of course, he's not as well. And it's going to take a long time for him to recover, if he even recovers from the psychological torture of all that time that was spent in political asylum, in isolation in the Ecuadorian embassy, and then in Belmarsh. Who knows how long, if ever, he'll fully recover from that. But it's wonderful that he is likely to be with his family soon, his partner Stella Morris and his two very young children. They're very, very young. That's a tragedy that he's being kept away from these very young children for most of their life, their short life up until now. And and let's not forget that the US, the CIA, was totally involved in this situation in the Ecuadorian embassy, and in fact were intending to assassinate Julian Assange in the embassy. So anyway, this is, it's a very, very sordid situation with the US and the CIA in relation to Julian Assange, and the corporate media has smeared him all the way, and they're disgraceful. I've often spoke about this in the number of videos I've done about Julian Assange, how ashamed I am of my government. They do not speak for me. How disgusting most of them are, that they have done nothing, absolutely nothing. And even yesterday, when his extradition was blocked, there was not a peep from one politician, except for maybe Adam Bandt, he's the head of the Federal Greens Party, and he's barely done anything at all, and only just in recent times he's said a couple of things, but basically done nothing. Even the state Labour Party and the state Greens here in Tasmania, I don't know about other states, but I think it's pretty much the same, have said nothing, even yesterday. So this just gives you an idea of who the master is in all of this, and that's US empire. If US empire does not want our country if it wants us to go along with whatever we do, we're complete US lackeys. So that's a disgrace, and that's how it is, and it's been like that since the CIA helped oust Gough Whitlam, the only good prime minister we've had in a really, really long time, a democratic socialist prime minister. They admitted to doing that, getting rid of him, and it's been a terrible downhill slide ever since. And any politician who gets into any power, basically they become a complete puppet, and all the politicians, line up behind them. That's what it's like here, and I think it's like that in the UK, except for, say, a very small handful of politicians. So anyway, I'm digressing here, but it's great. Despite all that, despite the terrible precedents that still remain due to this case of Julian Assange that endanger press freedom, it's just great. I just totally did not expect it, and I was feeling quite teary, and I even went outside and yelled something out. I was so excited, and I could hardly believe it. And it was just amazing, because you get, as I said in my video yesterday that I did about these couple of dreams I had of Assange, where he actually was free, and I was actually giving him a hug, and there were some other people giving him a hug. You might want to check that out. I totally was pessimistic about the whole thing. I totally was. I was expecting it, and even up until those last two tweets that Kevin Gostola tweeted, live tweeting from the Assange trial there in the UK, it was looking very grim, and then suddenly it turned, and I thought, well, if they think that he could kill himself if he's extradited to the US, because the prison system there is so horrific, the next tweet can't be, but I'm going to ignore that and go ahead and do it. So I was sort of just very, very, very cautiously optimistic, and sure enough, totally out of the blue, that was amazing. But as I said, it had nothing to do with saving Assange, saving this man's life, or press freedom, as far as the UK court was, sadly. Anyway, we can take these small little victories for Assange, the person. That's what this is, and I hope that he recovers as much as is possible, and that he has a long, happy, healthy life. And I wouldn't blame him if he sort of thought, okay, well, I'm going to keep my head down for a while, and sort of just enjoy my family and try and bring up my children who are so young, and they've been and I've missed out on their 4 or 5 years so far, and basically do that. I wouldn't blame him if he wanted to do that, because I still think he'll be a target for quite a long time. There's a lot of the CIA, Hillary Clinton's group, they're all throughout the Democratic Party. There's a whole bunch of people would like him dead, and so I think it's going to be a bit scary, it depends too on how fascistic the US gets in the coming years, whether they might even send a hit squad out to knock him off one day. I don't want to sound bleak or anything, but that's something that could happen. But maybe if he's just trying to raise his children and not too involved with WikiLeaks and stuff, that's probably not going to happen. Maybe he will be, I don't know. But he might be able to, that when the dust settles, they might sort of have their focus on somebody else who they see as some kind of threat to their empire and to their warmongering, because that's what this was all about. The US was embarrassed that somebody dared to expose the war crimes. Well, war is a crime, but it dared to expose the war crimes of empire, and you cannot have that happening, because they want things to just keep on going ad infinitum, the endless wars, and profit from all of that, the weapons industry and all of that. Everybody that profits from it, there's a lot of people. And so anybody that interferes with that profit motive, and also gaining hegemony in the regions, in these various regions, and aiming for full spectrum dominance, anybody who interferes with that is going to be a major target. And that's Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning, who basically helped also secure his freedom in a way by her attempts on suicide. Apart from the fact she's a hero, Chelsea Manning, but apparently the attempts she made on her own life, being in those types of prisons, also was another example of why Julian Assange should not be sent to those dreadful, dreadful, horrific, sadistic prisons. And I think it's so terrible that people are placed in those absolutely cruel, and it's cruel, and as that saying goes, cruel and unusual punishment is just ridiculous. The whole prison thing is ridiculous, really. There's a lot of that stuff that's happening is due to the fact that the US is it's a white supremacist and corporate oligarchy, and a lot of what is happening in these prisons is due to that, and due to the fact that they're private prisons. So there's a huge profit motive. There's a huge profit motive there. So anyway, that's for another story. That's for another time. So anyway, I'll share this little snippet from The Grey Zone by Dr. Mohammed Mirandis, and I think you'll find it interesting about Iran. We need to hear a lot more about Iran in a real sense, and so that and share this information about Iran, because it's only when people sort of think groups, including animals, are made targets, when there's a constant narrative that they are less than us. They're otherized. That's the only way to harness this sort of movement against a group, whether it be animals, where we constantly are told that they are less than us, so therefore we can use them as resources, food, clothing, entertainment, etc. And the people in Iran, that they're all monsters, they're all savages, they're all violent, they're all sort of terrorists and all of that. You're constantly told that over and over again, and then when it comes time that the US and Western allies want to invade because for Israel or with Israel, because they want to gain hegemony in the region, they want everybody to have a puppet so they can manipulate that puppet, then they employ these racist and Islamophobic narratives about Iran or about any other country. They'll employ racist narratives, xenophobic narratives, but they've got all the seeds in place, everything in place that they can just tap into them anytime they want to. So the more we hear about Iran and the more they are humanized, if you know what I mean, the better it is for all of us. The better it is for the world, so that these racist and xenophobic narratives don't take hold so easily. And also because we're all just citizens of the world, aren't we? And I want the Iranian people to live free from constant vilification, persecution, and threatening war against them, and the dreadful economic sanctions at a time of a pandemic. I want that all to end, just like I want, the Latin American countries to be free of constant meddling. We want the world to be free of constant US meddling and the Western imperialist nations that back them up. So anyway, stay tuned for this. Thank you. Thanks for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Stay tuned.
The United States that's been supporting extremists alongside Saudi Arabia, alongside Turkey, alongside Israel. It wasn't Iran that created these extremist groups in Afghanistan to fight the Soviet Union. It was the United States and Saudi Arabia. Their books were initially printed in the United States. Their school books or their extremist books to educate young people to become extremists were published in the United States and sent to the Pakistani-Afghanistani border to teach young kids to hate the Russians because they are infidels. Right? So the Americans were doing this with the Saudis. It wasn't the Iranians who gave Saddam chemical weapons. It wasn't the Iranians who, based on lies, a link between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda, or weapons of mass destruction that invaded, destroyed Iraq. And it wasn't Iran that created all these centers for torture across the region and beyond. Iran is a country that is right now surrounded by American military bases. It's constantly being threatened both through sanctions and through threats made by presidents, whether it's Trump, who says he'll to obliterate Iran, or Obama, who constantly said all options are on the table, thus threatening ordinary Iranians with war and destruction. It's not Iran that's been threatening the United States. The Iranians have been a victim of terrorism, just like yesterday. The Iranians have been a victim of human rights violations by the Americans trying to prevent ordinary Iranians from obtaining food and medicine. Yet the roles are reversed. It is the Iranians who are somehow the evil and monstrous threat to humanity. So the narrative that has been built around Iran by the Western media basically justifies all sorts of criminal activities, all sorts of atrocities by the United States, because when the United States does it, their intentions are good. They're not crimes. At worst, they're policy mistakes. So the United States or Israel cannot be seen as, the governments cannot be seen as evil, because the narrative has been constructed in a way in which the Iranians are evil. So if you kill an evil Iranian, since he's evil, it's still okay. But if the Iranians resist, then the Iranians are supporting extremism. So when the Iranians support the Houthis, who are being strangled by the Saudis and the Americans, the Iranians are the problem in Yemen. When the Iranians are supporting the secular Syrian government in Syria against the extremists, it's the Iranians who are the problem, not the extremist groups that the United States and its allies were supporting. And the list goes on. So again, my whole argument is that there are many decent people who are in the United States, in Europe, in our part of the world, who are trying to break this narrative or try to show the inconsistencies and the dishonesty that exist in these narratives. But the reality is that the corporate media and Western state-owned media and think tanks and public figures, they have created such a powerful narrative that no matter how hard you struggle to break that narrative, the sheer amount of times that this narrative is repeated in the public, whether through movies, whether in the news, or and other means, it becomes very difficult for progress to be made. However, at the end, I'd like to add this, that the way in which the old order is now collapsing, and the U.S. empire is on the decline, and the way in which the liberal capitalism is destroying the same populations that once upon a time were better off than the rest of the world. In other words, before we were mostly the target, and people in the United States and Europe were not suffering the way in which people in the rest of the world were suffering. But now many people in the United States and Europe I think, see the reality of, or the real nature of the way in which their governments work. And we saw this in Black Lives Matter, for example, how many people, there was a strong sense of communal support, people from different races and religions and ethnic and religious backgrounds coming together, to protest injustice. I think that this awareness is growing, and this creates an opportunity for people in the global South and people in the West to be able to engage in a more substantial way and in a more effective way in order to bring about greater chances for change in the future. So while I'm not at all optimistic about the U.S. government or Western governments in general, but I do, despite the dark times that that the world is experiencing right now, I do see, signs of hope where there could be greater understanding, and as a result, a better future for people across the globe as a result.